morning. I'm your host, Lenny Orlov with Seattle Human Services. If you're joining us online, live, or on YouTube, please take a moment to explore the closed captioning options by clicking on the gear under the video and selecting one of 7 languages: Arabic, Chinese, English, Korean, Russian, Spanish, or Vietnamese. Another important option is the subscribe button. If you click it, you'll join our virtual age-friendly community. And when you enable notifications, the bell icon, you'll be the first to know when this and other videos are ready for you to enjoy. Before we begin today's program, I would like to ask everyone to join me in our land acknowledgement. At Seattle Human Services, we acknowledge that we're on the traditional land of the first people of Seattle, the Duwamish people, past and present. We honor with gratitude the land itself and the Duwamish tribe. Visit duwamishtribe.org to learn more, find out how to get involved, and check out their upcoming events. It's really hard to believe that next week's episode, number 23 of Close to Home, Stories of Health, Tech, and Resilience, is the season finale for 2020. It's been quite a ride, and we want to thank more than 80 guests that joined us on this show and other virtual programs, and of course, all of our viewers and listeners. Almost 6,000 of you. Next week, we'll talk more about what to expect in 2021 as we welcome our final trio of presenters, all of them from NAPCA, National Asian Pacific Center on Aging. They're Emiko Ormsby from NAPCA's Community Resource Helpline, along with Jenna Holzberg and Teresa Chung, both from NAPCA's Senior Community Service Employment Program. To join, just like today and all year, please navigate to our virtual event hub, bit.ly/agefriendlylive. No spaces, but each word is capitalized. And you can visit there anytime, even when we're off for the holidays, to find program descriptions and a playlist with all the previous episodes, also with subtitles in 7 languages. But now, I'd like to welcome you to today's Close to Home. Our program today is called Sorting Fact from Fiction: Finding Truth in an Infodemic. And our guests are Doug Shadell and Jevin West. They will each present for about 15-20 minutes and answer questions for about 10. In the interest of time, we do want to ask that you go ahead and leave a comment right away, even while they're speaking or while something else is going on during the show. And that could be anything you'd like them to address based on their presentation or your knowledge of their work. On the live show, each time we stop for the Q&A, we'll always go to the phones first, followed by as many online questions as we have time for. My City of Seattle colleague, Andrea Yip, and Doug's ARP colleague, Bruce Carlson, will be our moderators this morning. They will receive all of your input and will select questions to pass along to our guests, who will either respond on the live broadcast or in the YouTube comment. And with any questions related to aging or disability, please call 1-844-348-5464 and speak to a Community Living Connections advocate. They can help locate a wide range of resources, including food and meals. The call is free, interpretation is available upon request, and services offered are professional, confidential, and most are also free of charge. Again, that number is 1-844-348-5464. You may also visit them on the web at communitylivingconnections.org to see the list of participating organizations in this network with links to their individual websites. Again, communitylivingconnections.org. Before turning it over to Doug, State Director at ARP Washington. And Doug, today we will be joining us by audio only. I wanted to remark on how closely Age Friendly Seattle works with this organization. City of Seattle is a member of a network of age-friendly states and communities, which is arranged by ARP here in the United States. Additionally, we have been collaborating on a number of projects, including major events such as the annual Age-Friendly Day at the Seattle Sounders. Well, we didn't actually get to gather at what's now called Lumen Field this year, but we certainly hope to restore the tradition in 2021, and we do want to make it a tradition every year. Today, though, it's my pleasure to welcome Doug Shadell into this virtual arena that is close to home. Doug, thank you so much for stopping by today. Please remember that you'll need to unmute your microphone. You can do that by pressing *6 on your phone, and then you'll be live on the program.
Great. Well, can you hear me?
Yes, Doug, you're on.
Great, thank you. Well, thank you, Lenny. And it's a pleasure to be here. And I just want to reiterate what you just said about our strong partnership with Age Friendly Seattle and your team. This goes back a couple years now, and Seattle really is one of those age-friendly communities that's leading the nation with the just detailed action plan and all the activities that have gone on so far and that you plan to do next year. So congratulations on that great work, and we look forward to continuing the collaboration. I'm also really happy to be sharing the time today with Dr. Jevin West, who's become a pretty good friend of ours. We've started this collaboration with them on this sorting fact from fiction issue. What was it, in June or July of this year? Had a really successful speaker series with Jevin's team at the University of Washington, the Center for Informed Public. And what you're going to get today from the two of us is just a taste of the type of content that we have been talking about earlier in the year and will continue to do next year. And hopefully at the end, we can share some plans about what we plan to do next year. Well, let me just get into my topic. This is the holiday season. And, we've been doing fraud prevention at ARP for many years. And what we find is that at the end of the year, there are a lot of scams that are specific to the holiday season. And when you overlay on top of that, the global COVID pandemic, you really have a recipe for financial trouble, people getting into financial trouble. So I want to just briefly talk about some of the scams we're seeing this time of year. If you want to advance the slide. So you should see on your screen fraud risk factors. Is that what you see? I can't see what you're seeing here. So is that right?
That is correct, Doug.
Okay. And I'm just going to assume when I say advanced that you'll see. So, before I get into the specific examples, I just want to give you some general principles, some things we've learned in our research about what makes people vulnerable in general to scams. Worry and decisions, high anxiety and emotion, if you see that on the screen. What we know from interviewing con men and victims for years is that when we're in a high state of anxiety or a heightened emotional state, that can lead to poor decision making. And in fact, scammers look for people who are in that high anxiety state or heightened emotion state. Well, who right now in 2020 isn't in a high anxiety state? And so that's very worrisome in general. If you want to advance internet shopping, more and more of us, because of the pandemic, are shopping online because of COVID. And there's nothing inherently wrong with shopping on the internet, but there's a lot of scams on the internet. We're going to talk about some of them. If you want to advance to debit cards, this is something we just did a survey of 1,100 Americans. We do this every year at AARP. And 3 out of 4 Americans plan to pay for their gifts online with debit cards. And why is that significant? A lot of people don't realize that when you pay with a debit card, if something goes wrong and you don't get the product, there aren't as many protections as there are if you use a credit card. Same with peer-to-peer. If you want to advance to the next slide or next one, peer-to-peer transactions. Almost 7 in 10 say they are going to use a peer-to-peer payment like Venmo or Zelle. Again, there's nothing intrinsically wrong with these payment devices. Just to know that if something goes wrong, if you send money on Venmo, you pretty much, that's it. You're not going to get it back. So limiting those transactions to people you know, as opposed to buying things from vendors on the internet with them, is probably a wise move. I want to advance to the next slide. So I want to just give you some examples, go ahead, of holiday scams. Let's start with charities. If you advance to the charity scam slide and click down a couple, fake charities are everywhere this time of year. Our research shows that 40 to 50% of all the charitable giving that happens in a year happens in the month of December. And we are in the month of December and in a global pandemic. So it's really, not only are we getting more offers, but people are making a lot of donations. There's some simple tips, and we'll go over more at the end, but just on the front end, the examples of charity scams that are out there, anything having to do with COVID should be a red flag. Anything having to do with cancer, anything having to do with wounded children, babies with cancer. What you want to do is we don't want to discourage giving at all. That is not the point of this. The point is to find out where the money goes. You might be surprised to learn that it is not illegal for a professional fundraiser to keep 95% of the money they raise, provided they don't lie about it and provided they're registered with the Secretary of State's office. So if you give $100 to a charitable cause and you found out later that $95 out of that $100 went to the cost of fundraising, you might think twice about it. So the way to find that out is before you give, go to the Secretary of State, Washington Secretary of State, and if you go ahead and advance the slide, www.sos.wad.gov/charities. And you can look up any charity that you've gotten a piece of mail from, or that has texted you or emailed you or sent you mail. And before you give, find out how much of the money that you're giving is going to the charitable purpose and how much is going to the actual cause. And the other thing we tell people is consider creating your own annual charitable giving plan. At the beginning of the year, decide who you're going to give to and how much. Check them out, give, and then the whole rest of the year when you get these solicitations, just say, thank you, I'll consider you for next year. If you advance the slide to the next one, COVID-related scams, these are just, the Federal Trade Commission says they've received something like 600,000 complaints this year that are COVID-related. We have all kinds of robo-dialers calling, saying, one of the most typical robo-dial calls that you can get is, congratulations, we've got a $2,000 stimulus check waiting for you. Press 1 to get the information, or you might get an email like that. And what they're after is your bank account information so they can deposit the money. You want to advance the slide. Facebook ads. I wrote a column in the AARP magazine this month about my own victimization. I was looking for face masks early on in the pandemic in April. And all of a sudden, for some reason, I was searching on Google for them. All of a sudden, on my Facebook page, all these pop-ups came up about ads. I spent $30 on 3 masks and I never got them. And had I checked it out, there were all kinds of information on the internet about this company I invested in. So I should know better, but I didn't. It can happen to anybody. And again, the reason I fell for that is, well, I was stupid, but also, like everyone else, I was in this heightened state of anxiety. And you just often make not very good decisions when you're in that state. All kinds of scams about in-home tests. We saw a display ad recently that said FDA approved in-home tests. Well, we'll get there, but all year they've been running these ads, and the FDA had not approved any in-home tests. And phishing scams that use name brands like Verizon or Amazon or you name it, they're trying to tie everything to COVID. So we'll get to this at the end, but a red flag in general is, if you hear the word COVID in a pitch, that's a red flag. So let's go on to tech support scams. If you want to advance the slide down a couple, you can drop down all of these if you want. I just want to, these are not so much holiday scams, although during this time of turmoil during the holidays, people tend to click on things they shouldn't click on. One of the most common scams out there is tech support scams. And what will happen is you'll get a pop-up on your computer screen that says, warning, your computer may be infected. And sometimes there'll even be a loud siren going off, right? Well, this is just software, JavaScript software that's been downloaded. You may have clicked on an ad that had, in fact, or malicious JavaScript, and your computer probably isn't infected, but you don't know that. And for our people, this is a lot of the victims are older folks like myself who don't know a lot about computers. And so you call the number, and what they try to do is ask you to let them into your computer so they can find out what's really going wrong. You do not want to let anyone into your computer, obviously, because they can find out what's in there. They can write down all kinds of bank account information. And if you get one of these warnings, the simplest thing to start with is to turn your machine off, even though they'll tell you not to, and just reboot it. And likely it will go away. But hundreds of thousands of people are falling for this every week in America. Robocalls also is another way that tech support scam operators will reach you, is they'll dial your phone and say there's something wrong with your Amazon account or your Microsoft account. And both Amazon and Microsoft, or Google for that matter, will tell you that they never will call you to tell you that. And so that by itself is a red flag. And then ads that claim to diagnose your computer. Let's say your computer's running slow, you think something's wrong with it, and you go online and say, fix my computer or PC cleaner. Ads will pop up that could be malicious operations, and they'll send you to a fake website. If you're worried about your computer being too slow, the thing to do, the experts tell me, is you should contact someone, a teenager, someone who's on the computer who you trust, or go to a brick and mortar tech support place, repair place. Do not download software on the internet. If you keep moving here in the interest of time, work at home schemes. Right now, everybody's working from home, but there's also millions of people unemployed. And so these are rampant on the internet, whether it's Craigslist, whether it's emails, robocalls saying you can earn 1,000 if you want to click down through these. Robocalls saying you can earn 1,000 a week from home. Oops. Ads that claim you can set up your own home business. Web design scams are huge. You can set up your own web page, and if you pay me $1,000 or $499, we'll set up a web page and you'll have all kinds of business. Well, it's not that easy to set up a web page and compete with Amazon. And what they'll do is they'll take $500 and then say, well, to get business, that's just to set it up. To get business, you got to give us another $5,000. So beware of that. And I just want to, if you want to advance to the final screen here, I just want to reiterate some of the general tips that most of us know, but it's worth remembering. First of all, if you want to click on the first one, never make a buying decision when you're upset or anxious. I've interviewed probably 30 convicted con artists over the last 20 years. And when you ask them the question, what is your main strategy for ripping people off, they always give you the same answer. Get the victim under the ether, get them emotional, get them anxious. Well, right now in the environment we're in, that work is already done for them. Everyone is anxious. And you just, it's okay to be anxious. You just don't want to make a major financial buying decision when you're in that state. Advance to the next one. Avoid shopping late in the day. We have research that shows that your willpower depletes over the course of a day. And so there are studies that actually show that you're more likely to make a bad decision late in the afternoon, late on a Friday. The hardest time to scam somebody is Monday morning. So just be aware of it, or after a holiday party. And I think you know what I'm referring to there. Anything that might impair your judgment. Try to avoid shopping. Shop on websites you know are legitimate. If you want to click through these, don't ever click on links after receiving an unsolicited email or a pop-up. Initiate contact with the websites and try and deal only with legitimate websites where you go to them. They're not coming to you, because it's really easy to fake a website There are hundreds of thousands of look-alike websites out there that pretend to be reliable name brands. And if you're considering an offer you saw online, do research for the company. That includes the word scam or complaint. And what I mean by that is companies know how to clean their reputation on the internet. And so if you Google somebody because you've got a phone call and you want to check them, it could be that the first page or the second page is all the money they've given to charity. Well, they're doing that to clean their reputation. So if you're thinking about hiring ABC Company, before you do, go on the internet and say ABC Company fraud or ABC Company complaint and see what comes up. And you might find that what comes up is different than if you just Googled them without that. So that's it in a nutshell. If you want to just go to the last slide, I just want to mention AARP for the last 4 or 5 years has been working on this program called the Fraud Watch Network. We have a helpline. The number is here, 877-908-3360. This is where we have volunteers who are trained in how to spot fraud, who can give peer counseling to people about how to avoid fraud. You can call that number if you got approached and you're worried that it might be a scam, but you're not sure. Don't feel like you need to, know for sure it's a scam to call that number, and they can direct you. It's a really popular program. Thousands of people a month call it, and so I'd encourage it. And if you want more information about what AARP Washington is doing in the fraud space, at the bottom here, it's www.aarp.org/Washington. I don't know why the Washington was left off of there. So that's it in a nutshell. Lenny, I want to turn it back to you to see if there's any questions.
Thank you so much, Doug. We appreciate you jumping on this call. Let's see. So what we usually do on this program is we ask folks, while we check in on everybody that joined by phone, we ask that you go ahead and put in your comments, questions, feedback for AARP Washington, so that Doug could address it while we have him on the line. And for me personally, this is good to know what to expect and look out for over the holidays. It's something to be aware of for sure. I know there's a YouTube channel out there where this YouTuber, he pretends to be like a vulnerable person, and then invites a scammer in and then really punishes them by deleting their files. I enjoy seeing that because they get a taste of their own medicine. So that recently came up for me, maybe because I was planning this event and it was suggested as a video. Interesting how the internet works, actually. Looks like there's a comment there. So what I'm going to do is now turn it over to one of our moderators, Andrea Yip, to see what folks are saying.
Thank you. We had a comment come in. If you could talk more about the tips on what to Google to find out if a company is legit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, the general advice about, it depends on what the company service you're looking for is. You want to find, if it's a charity, you want to find out if they're registered with the Secretary of State. And like we talked about, where the money goes, the Secretary of State collects that information. If it's an investment company, you want to make sure that they're registered with the state and registered with the SEC. But if it's just a general service, the tip that I give, maybe I wasn't clear in this description, but put the word, when you're doing a Google search and you don't know about the company, you can contact the Federal Trade Commission to see if there's any complaints. You can contact the State Attorney General's office to see if there's any complaints. You can contact the Better Business Bureau. But there's a lot of sort of natural organic crowdsourcing that goes on the internet if you know what to search for and the words to search for it. So like ABC Company, the example I gave, I won't give a real company name, just like ABC Roofing Company, scam. See if there's any complaints that have the word scam in it. And if there are, you will find pages and pages often of them. The other just buying tip in general when you're buying major appliances, I personally have for years used services like Angie's List, where you pay a monthly fee and the members of that organization evaluate services. So for major purchases, that's also another tip I would give.
Thanks, Doug. Looks like that's all the comments so far, and I really appreciate this presentation. I have a teenage daughter who brings me websites all the time, and I always kind of say, this doesn't really look legit, so I'm going to bring this presentation to her as well.
I have one of those too, a teenage daughter. I'm not sure she listens to me, but that's another problem.
Great. Well, thank you, Andrea, and thank you, Doug. Looks like, something just came through. Why don't we go ahead and do that one question that just showed up there, and then we'll keep moving on, and maybe we'll have more time at the end to check in on more questions about ARP. Turning it back over to you, Andrea.
Great. I think you've heard about these, Doug. So here's a comment. My dad fell for a late night phone call from someone he thought was his grandson, calling from jail in another county or country, and he sent bail money. I don't recall if he reported this to police. Do police departments do anything?
Do police, you mean after the fact, I think is what he meant.
Probably.
It's very hard to catch them after the fact, especially if you're buying a gift card. Usually so these are scams. People pretend to be the granddaughter or the grandson. And why are they doing that? Because it immediately gets you into a heightened emotional state. I remember interviewing a victim of the grandparent scam one time, and it said, and my colleague Bruce Carlson, who's on with us, was with me. We interviewed this couple in California, and he goes, look, I made a mistake. I sent $3,000. I wired $3,000. But when it's your grandchildren, you act first and you ask questions later. I wasn't going to question anything. If they're in trouble, I'm going to act right away. Well, I get the emotion of that, but it resulted in it was a scam, And this is just another example of how the scammers either find people who are already in an emotional state because it's easy to exploit, or they induce that emotional state with a pitch like grandma, grandpa, that kind of thing. It's very difficult to get the money back. I did a story for the AARP magazine in June about a group of gang members in a Georgia prison who were running a jury duty scam that was just like that. They had smuggled cell phones in. This was actually an epidemic of, they had thousands of cell phones. And they could do research on local sheriff's departments. They'd call you and say, I'm calling from the county sheriff's department. You missed jury duty, send $500. So those are all things to just take a breath. Don't react to them. If you're worried about it, call your grandson. Say, I'm not going to do anything for you until I independently call my actual granddaughter or grandson and see if they're really in jail.
Well, thank you, Doug. Thank you for that example and for answering the questions. Doesn't look like we have any questions on the phones at the moment. So I'd like us to move along. Again, thank you, Doug. Well, if you can stick around, we may have questions for you that come in a little bit later. Awesome.
I want to hear Dr. West. I'm sticking around for sure.
There you go. There you go. And this is, of course, being recorded, so you'll be able to watch it later. You'll see what he's showing us. So again, thanks. I'm gonna close or mute your line, Doug. But if questions come in, you'll unmute yourself again.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. So before we move on to Dr. West and invite him to the virtual podium, to continue our discussion, this time from the point of view of the Nonpartisan Center for an Informed Public at the University of Washington, I'd like to take a few minutes to share an important resource. And while I do that, a reminder to, again, go ahead and start, sharing any questions, comments, or concerns you may have for Dr. West or for Doug. So if you're watching us online, on the screen is a resource that's there to help all of us navigate the COVID-19 pandemic. According to coronavirus.wa.gov, Washington State's coronavirus response website, staying home is still safest, with an emphasis on restricting gatherings. We want to prevent virus transmission and move closer to that safe start that we've been talking about a lot this year. So we are encouraged to stay as close to home as possible. But if we do go out, we're asked to keep it quick, maintain social distancing, and wear a facial covering. This information is currently offered in actually 36 languages, which is pretty impressive. But the take-home message here does seem to be fewer, shorter, smaller, safer. And if we scroll down on that web page, we'll see that there's information on things like what's open, where to get help, how to report a violation, things like that. All of that's available on coronavirus.wa.gov. So we do encourage you to tell your friends and loved ones about this resource. And there is info there for families, employers, and workers as well. There's a phone number that folks can call if they don't have access to this on the internet, and that's 1-800-525-0127. That's Washington Department of Health Assistance Hotline. That's open Monday through Friday from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. and also Saturdays and Sundays from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. Same hours apply on observed state holidays, and we do have some holidays coming up here. Again, that number is 1-800-525-0127. Or if you just want to talk to someone about the stress that COVID-19 may be causing you, you can call Washington Listens. And that's a different number. It's also a toll-free number, 1-833-681-0211. That's open from Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. and on weekends from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. That number for Washington Listens is, again, 1-833-681-0211. So we do want to thank you in advance for passing this information along. But right now, let's continue with Close to Home, stories of health, tech, and resilience. Our next guest is Dr. Jevin West. Jevin West is an associate professor in the Information School at the University of Washington. He is the co-founder of the Data Lab and the director of the new Center for an Informed Public at UW. His research and teaching focus on the impact of technology on science and society, with a focus on slowing the spread of misinformation. He also is the co-author of the new book, Calling Bullshit: The Art of Skepticism in a Data-Driven World. Cool name. I get to say that on the program. Hopefully, we may need to bleep it out for YouTube. We'll see. So, Dr. West, thank you so much for being here today. Please remember to unmute your microphone. You're now live on Close to Home.
Well, great. Well, thanks, Lenny, and thanks to the city of Seattle. And yes, you may have to bleep that. At least when I've talked to journalists on radio or TV, we have to be careful. I don't want anyone to get fined because of it. I just wanted to get them excited about learning about the topic. And I also want to thank Doug for his slide presentation and for the collaboration that we've been having. As he mentioned, between our Center for an Informed Public at the University of Washington and AARP and other partners involved with these projects, including VECU. It's been highly productive. I look forward to more of these kinds of sessions together because I learned so much. Actually, it was really interesting listening to Doug talking about using our younger generation, our teenagers, to teach us about some of the technology. I've learned that, and I work in a technology school, so I highly recommend that. And always, Doug always has super interesting stories when it comes to fraud detection. And as you can imagine, when talking about misinformation and disinformation, they interact a lot when these topics of fraud and conspiracy theories. Many of the same things that Doug talked about apply very much to the disinformation world, the misinformation world that we all seem to be dealing with nowadays more than ever. In fact, so much so that large organizations like the World Health Organization labeled on February 2nd of this year, as the pandemic was just starting to take force around the world, that they were not only fighting an actual pandemic, but also an infodemic. This is the misinformation and disinformation that's making it harder for health professionals to address this big challenge that the world is facing right now. So what I wanted to talk about today was a little bit related, well, like I said, a lot related to what Doug is saying, but a little bit about some of the resources we've been developing over the last year in our new center. And I should say that today, next slide, is the birthday of our center. Exactly 1 year ago, 2019, we launched this new center, this new experiment on campus. It was pretty unique when you look at across the country and across the world. We're one of the first. There are others now devoted to this as well, but we were among one of the first devoted to this topic of misinformation and disinformation, at least from our perspective as computational social scientists and policy scholars and educators. We are devoted, next slide. Oh, and by the way, that slide there, sorry, Lenny, to make you go back and forth. That was taken at the event where we launched the new center. There are the presidents of Washington State University and the University of Washington. They were sort of agreeing that this was a statewide effort, and we all need to work together. It's going to require more than just researchers and teachers. It's going to require journalists and organizations like AARP, and it's going to require government agencies and industry leaders. This is a problem that really touches everything. And it's hard to address a pandemic if you can't address the misinformation issue that we're dealing with right now. The crisis, I would say that. I don't want to sound too melodramatic, but it is a crisis of information right now. And it's partly because we are inundated with information all the time. The information ecosystems in which we all live now is something we haven't. It's a new thing for human society. All right, next slide. So our mission is to marshal all these collective resources as a public research institution, which is what really drove me to this campus. I really have really been excited ever since a kid about this public mission of education, and being at a public university really is something that I'm proud of. And we're embedded in local communities, and I am a citizen of Seattle. So when getting this invitation to do this program with the city of Seattle, this is my community too, which is something I care a lot about. And our goal in the center is to resist the kind of strategic misinformation that we're hearing, strategic misinformation that Doug just talked about, to promote an informed society, of course, something we should all want, and strengthen democratic discourse. So what I'm going to do now for the next 10 minutes is talk about just a few of the resources that we've put together and some of the things that we've learned working in this area. Next slide. So first of all, I want to give you the URL, the web address that you can go to learn more about other resources we have. I can't go through all of them, and I certainly don't have time to go in detail to all of them. But you can go to this website. It's www.cip.uw.edu/resources. And we're going to continually add new resources almost on a weekly basis of things we've developed or things that we have seen from our colleagues and have vetted ourselves. We have many more things even that's on the website. So if there's a topic that you want to ask us about when it comes to misinformation, please reach out to our center. Just visit our website, cip.uw.edu. All right, so let me start with one of the most recent projects we released. So if you clicked on this, this was co-released with several different partners. this was a project called Trusted Journalism. And this is one of many kinds of skills that we as information consumers need to pick up as we are constantly foraging around and looking for good information when it comes to COVID, or it comes to the elections, or whatever major event that we're concerned about, or when it comes to our personal health, what are the things that are going to affect me personally? And one of the things that we need to always be doing is checking the source. So what does that mean specifically? And sometimes it's not so easy if we're not trained to do this kind of investigative work and to check on the actual journalists also doing the investigative work. And so we released a public service campaign in collaboration with the Trusted Project and with RTDNA and various other organizations. And we've been pushing this national campaign around people that are 65 and older. So really trying to customize it for that particular group. And here's just some of the 8 different indicators that we talk about there, that when checking a news site or a new news site, pushing some sort of news story, you want to ask these kinds of 8 questions. Who's the expert? Check in on the journalists themselves. What other things have they published? Look at labels. What's the purpose of the story here? Is it clear? Is there any underlying agenda? What are the references? And make sure there are references. In fact, if you don't see references or sources, that's usually a bad sign. You should be able to quickly just figure out who funds this, what organization, has been supporting it if it's a large organization. If they have been supported by a reasonable organization, what kind of history do they have? Are they a news site that just popped up last week? You should be able to find those. And if you can't find it, that should be a red flag itself. If you're looking like, let's say, Fox or CNN, I mean, those aren't the kind of things we're talking about. I think those are sort of well known. I'm talking more about the kinds of journalism that's popping up more and more. These are sometimes legitimate and sometimes not legitimate news sites that look like a newspaper, a local newspaper, in fact, that are replacing a lot of these newspapers that are going extinct, even more so during this pandemic. And so the idea is to dig a little bit deeper and see who these journalists or these journalist venues are. And we're seeing, because of this major extinction event going on in journalism, we're seeing people and organizations filling those voids, and not all of them are legitimate news sources. So just at least be aware. You may not be able to tell whether it's legitimate. That takes some time, but at least be aware that there's more and more illegitimate news sources that don't have trained journalists, that have an agenda, that aren't putting out good news. And so just be aware there's more of that. So a lot of times we need, now more than ever, we have to be aware of these things. Look at, for example, whether the journalists are actually local individuals too. We see a lot with these news sites popping up that they're not even people that live in the United States. They're hired people from other countries writing stories about some local issue just to look legitimate and then to push certain kinds of agenda. Make sure that there is actionable feedback, that they're admitting when they make mistakes, et cetera. So there's all sorts of things you can do, and you can dig more into the details. We provide way more details than I'm going to be able to provide here, but you can look at, there's different ways to evaluate news sites. And now more than ever, we need to be doing that. Okay, next slide. We have a whole bunch of resources. The Calling BS book that Lenny had mentioned is based on a class that my colleague Carl Bergstrom and I developed several years ago that we're now teaching, actually teaching literally right now. We had our lectures this week already, and our last week of the quarter, sadly, is already next week. It goes by so fast, but we've made a lot of those lectures available for free. You can just listen to some of our lectures on things like causality, on selection bias, on the ways in which data and figures and statistics can be manipulated, and ways in which misinformation gets wrapped in those kinds of those forms of communication. The sad thing is that data sometimes gets a free pass. It has this veneer of authority, and sometimes it deserves that authority, but sometimes it doesn't, and it's used many times. Certainly it has during COVID. In fact, we could have written the entire book with COVID examples during this pandemic of misinformation and statistics and numbers being used to push misinformation, sometimes on purpose and sometimes not on purpose. We also have great colleagues and faculty like Kate Starbird and Emma Spiro and many others in our center and at the university that specialize in disinformation research on crisis events. And that's what Kate, for example, has been doing for a long time, and there's several lectures that she gives on the topic. Next slide. Again, these are things that you'll find on the website. Lenny already mentioned the book, but the book is mostly around misinformation that comes wrapped in data and graphics. So if you hear a strange statistic about the current pandemic, you may be intimidated by that. And the whole point of this book is to sort of empower people that aren't experts in stats or in computer science, to just sort of make us all better consumers of data misinformation. Next slide. You can check our website out, or you can go and you can check the book. We've been doing a lot of work trying to bring public attention to synthetic media and deepfakes. This is the technology that allows people to basically put any words that someone else wants into someone else's mouth that they never said. So I could, for example, create a video of Lenny saying that the Sounders are the worst soccer team in all of MLB. Now, he would never say that, but I could create a video and you wouldn't be able to tell a difference whether he was saying that or not. And so we want you aware of that technology. Fortunately, there weren't as many issues with the election around at least deepfakes, but other countries have had issues around elections, and certainly deepfakes will raise its ugly head at some point. And so we want the public aware that there is technology that makes it easy for anyone very cheaply to create videos, audio files, images, etc., of things that just never were true and things that people never said. And so be aware of it. We do provide resources on things to look out for if you do see videos that seem real. In fact, I just recently got one from a family member of a video that was manipulated. It wasn't real, but it was spreading virally on email. So watch out. Just because it's a video, it may not be a real video. Now, we've had the technology before, but now it's even cheaper and easier to create. Next slide. We also have quizzes and stuff, quizzes and interactive tutorials that you can take to learn more about this technology. Again, these are all links in our resources. Since I already talked about this, I'll move on to the next slide, but there are lots of fun ways to learn about these topics. You can go to the next one. We just released that recent one in collaboration with Microsoft. Sorry, if you'll go back one more, Lenny, sorry about that. The previous one that I mentioned, the Spot the Deepfake, was a collaboration with Microsoft's Defending Democracy team and other organizations, and it provides a way for you to kind of learn in a fun way about these technologies. We have a lot of these kinds of quizzes and things we're creating. In fact, one of my colleagues is in the center right now is creating an escape room where these will be available hopefully at libraries, where you can go into your library when we can go in them in person, which instead of right now you can just go quickly pick up a book and walk out, but hopefully you'll have a chance to play the game through an escape room where you can play these different scenarios, learning and having some fun, and then all with the goal of becoming a better information consumer. Next slide. We also have been working with the Pacific Science Museum, developing virtual exhibits, since we can't go in and visit them, and that's very sad because I love the Pacific Science Center and I feel bad for them right now because they're really hurting financially because people can't come to the museum right now. We've been working with them building virtual exhibits. We built one around things to look out for with graphs. Anytime you see a graph with data, we provide some things to look out for in that in these virtual exhibit. We did one around COVID-19 and misinformation around COVID-19, what to look out for. And we look forward to making more of those. But those are the kinds of things you can use as well to learn more about things to look out for. Next slide. We also just recently completed a project around the election. This was something we called the Election Integrity Partnership, where actually we worked with AARP digital volunteers, and they helped identify some things they saw in their own digital neighborhoods, and we used those tips that we had internally at the center to let platforms know about them if they were ones that violated policies or that were based on false information. And this was a nonpartisan group like our center more generally. We are a nonpartisan center at the University of Washington, and we take that very serious, and we did in this project as well. And if you want to learn more about that, you can go to that project about misinformation we worked on during the election cycle. And some of that continues, some of it still continues. There's still local misinformation, et cetera. But since this is more about health misinformation, I'll wrap up here with a couple others. If you'll go to the next slide, Lenny. We also have many seminars and workshops and webinars that we have done that we now make available on our website. We did one with one of our colleagues, Mike Caulfield at the Washington State University, that talked a lot about his SIFT method. It's a really great way of thinking about how to deal with misinformation online. It's SIFT. It stands for Stop, Investigate the Source, Find Other Coverage, and Trace Back to the original information. And he provides details in that seminar and also on the website that's provided on how to use this method when you interact with information that you may not be aware of online, or just trying to do your own little investigative work. I think Mike is a real leader in this, and we've provided some specific details on how to follow this particular SIFT method. We also do a Misinfo Day where we work with educators locally, and high school teachers themselves are actually now running this. We spend a day with high school students from around the state working on this issue of misinformation, and now we're making that stuff available, those kinds of resources as well, for the public more broadly, because they apply just as much to older generations as it does the younger generations. Okay, next slide, last slide, and then we'll wrap up. And if there's any questions, we also have been doing lectures and working with local partners, KUOW. We did a Stand with the Facts series with KUOW that we have just made all available. So if you want to listen to some of those, whether it deals with policies around misinformation, whether it deals with how-tos, whether it deals with some of the efforts around the country around these issues, we've done that lecture series. We also have some lecture series at the University of Washington now that we did with the Office of the Provost, where we brought in different speakers on these various different topics. So I think the main thing I would sort of give to you today is there's a whole bunch of resources that we're trying to make available for all of you. I'm happy to answer specific questions. You can go to the last slide there, Lenny. You can follow again this website, cip.uw.edu, and you can also reach out to me or the center on Twitter or email or wherever you want. But please feel free to reach out. This is a center for the city of Seattle, for the state of Washington, and for the public more broadly. And there are a lot of resources out there. So please reach out to them. And if you have specific questions, I'm happy to answer those now.
Thank you, Dr. West, for all these different resources. And it looks like we do have quite a few questions, but I don't want to, I should have mentioned this from the outset, but the virtual events portal that all of you folks who joined us online used to access today's show and all these shows this year was conceptualized and created by a group of the iSchool students as part of their
that's so
project.
Cool. That's so cool.
Yeah.
That's so neat. Thanks for telling me that, Lenny. That's great.
Absolutely.
Our students are amazing, and so it doesn't surprise me that they were able to help with that.
Yeah, I want to actually give a shout out to Madison Laughlin, Adrian Ionescu, Mikias Lima, and Tristan Maselli. You know, it wouldn't be possible without you. And I hope you're tuning in this morning and that you're doing well. So. It doesn't look like we have any questions on the phone, so I'm going to turn it over to Andrea for our online questions. Looks like we have quite a few.
Thanks, Lenny. So, Dr. West, we have a few questions here. One is experience that you had. So how do you deal with family members or friends when they send you something that you know is misinformation?
It's such a good, important question. It's something I personally deal with family and friends. And I work on this every single day. You'd think I have a perfect answer. I'd say, here's the formula. Here's how you do it. Super easy. You just say this, or you give them this. It's not easy because these are people that you care about. These are people that care about you. And so one of the most important things that I recommend, and this comes from my personal experience, but also from research that's been done in this area, that you really need to approach it with empathy, and with the perspective that the individual that's sending you this, whether it's your uncle, your neighbor, your cousin, your brother, your mom, your dad, they're doing it because they believe it. They want you to have this information. And so the best thing is just to start asking them questions about where they got it to help do this, start with the sourcing questions. I think that's important. And this, just the empathy itself is really an important start. And also to try to have these conversations in more private settings, if you're willing to make the investment, that doing a lot of these conversations happening on Twitter or Facebook in public, people react differently and they behave differently than they would in a personal phone call or on a personal email. And I think, trying to bring sort of a personal, more intimate conversation to that is helpful. And to do that, when you go forward with these conversations, doing so, with not always the intent of trying to reconvince them, but to just try to sort of get them to sort of think through it in the ways that you would as an investigative reporter, or as someone that's just trying to learn, someone who is doing it out of curiosity rather than a lawyer. You don't want to be the lawyer. To take that persona out of there. Don't be the lawyer going there and cross-examining them, and people aren't going to be convinced by that. In fact, there's some evidence of what's called backfire effect, although there's been evidence that backfire effects aren't actually true. This is this idea that they'll become even more entrenched in their ideas if you throw facts at them and push certain things. There's been great work by Lewandowski and other researchers that have talked about the actual strategies by which you do that, but that can get complicated fast. I mean, there is the truth sandwich that people talked about, sort of, you start with the truth, and then you can talk about what the conspiracy theory is or whatever, and then you have sort of the other piece. To be honest, I don't really like the metaphor, but the idea is that you want to keep repeating in some ways the true piece of information and the false information. But I think the main thing here is to engage with them in all sincerity, and don't think that they're going to change their mind just by you throwing some facts at them, because people build narratives of the world, and when you shake that, and sometimes that can happen, it can be a very uncomfortable situation, and people don't, that's a hard thing to accept. So think of it as humans, and again, I don't have a perfect solution other than just engage with them, and hopefully having a productive conversation will sort of help in the next conversation or the one after that. So I mean, these things take time, and right now it's hard to compete with all the information online that everyone's reading.
Thank you. We have some more questions around when the vaccine's going to come out. How much of a problem do you think that will have for the misinformation?
Huge problem. In fact, I was just talking on CNN, the Spanish version of CNN, just this morning, that will be broadcast on Sunday, about this very issue. And it's something that we're turning more of our focus in the center to. We actually hired an expert on this. Her name's Colina Coltai. She just recently finished her PhD at the University of Texas, Austin. She's joining us as a postdoctoral scholar in the center, working on this nearly 100% of her time. She has taught me a lot already, and the collaborations that we have right now with public health, the Population Health Initiative at the University of Washington is building that. We're actually doing, we're setting up a bunch of different research projects around this issue. It's something we are highly concerned about. And let me tell you why we should be concerned about it. Because a lot of the research coming out right now around the growth of this anti-vaccination movement is very concerning. There's millions and millions of more followers to these groups in Facebook. Although just today, Facebook made a pretty big announcement from their standpoint, because it's been quite different than their previous positions. They are now actively taking down misinformation around COVID vaccination and vaccines. That's a big deal, because up until then, first of all, they don't want to be at all in the business of taking things down, but they realize they pretty much have to when it comes to these kinds of things, because the movement is growing. And right now, the results from recent polls and surveys are not good. Some of these national polls that have looked at how many Americans would take the vaccination right now, it's less than 50% for the most part. And each survey has a slightly different result, but that's kind of the take home. In fact, it's even lower in some surveys. I think Pew's survey was even lower. It might have been a third in Pew's. I'll have to look that up. The main thing is that it's a small number, and not all of those people are anti-vaccination. A lot of them are just people that are hesitant to be the first group, and that's understandable. But there is a process by which these do get approved, and there's been great discussions recently on radio programs. I'd recommend. I was just on one recently with an expert, Angela Rasmussen from I think George Washington, and she or Georgetown. I always mix those up. So, but she gave a great program on the things that should provide some sort of reduce some of the concern people have maybe around vaccinations. But it's a huge thing, and we have to deal with it. There's a ton of misinformation around it, and many of those that are pushing this misinformation are from the well-known usual suspects of conspiracy theory, like the QAnon groups and kind of the professional conspiracy theorists out there. They gain attention and influence on social media when they jump on these crisis events, very similar to the ways that Doug talked about how scammers do that. What they do is they take advantage of times of anxiety and uncertainty, and that's when they can gain influence and they can make money on these conspiracy theories. It's not just pushing some idea, although there are a lot of people that are just legitimate and concerned, and that's understandable, but we hope to get the right information to them to at least allow them to make a decision on whether they should or should not take a vaccination. Just so you know, me as a researcher at the University of Washington works with a lot of these public health experts. I think it's one of the most important things we can do to get out of this pandemic, and I'm fully confident in taking this vaccination. And there's always some concern, yes, but when you look at the process that the FDA and other government organizations have gone through, that hasn't changed. That still holds. And there are thousands of people that have been in these trials, and we'll get a lot more information coming down the pipeline. But the rise of misinformation is the thing that we're working on and something we're concerned about for sure.
Thank you so much, Dr. West. Fascinating how these overlap with what Doug was talking about. We're over time on our program. However, if you, Dr. West, and you, Doug Shadell, if you have time to stick around, we do have maybe one or two more questions that came in that we would love to have you answer. Do you have a few more minutes?
I do have a couple of minutes, but I will have to run probably shortly after that because I have to go give a lecture.
Why don't we do one more? I'm going to turn it back over to Andrea for that.
Great. Thanks, Lenny. So this one, either Dr. West or Doug, if you want to answer. So this is around products and potential misinformation around products that are out there. So this question is around any tips on products like sanitizing, for COVID, sanitizing wands or personal air purifiers. These are being out in the market. And they're thinking that what they're seeing is not what's stated. So have any of you dealt with kind of the product side of misinformation?
Doug, I will defer to you on this, although I'll just say this. If it sounds too good to be true, it usually is. If someone says they've got a magic wand, even just to say it's a magic wand or just a wand that will sort of clear out all the infectious particles in the air is something I'm always a little skeptical of. So too bad to be true or too good to be true is something to at least be questioning. Doesn't mean that there isn't a product worth looking more into, but just as a generalization around being a little bit of a skeptic on these kinds of products, be aware, especially during this time. But I'll defer to Doug more on maybe the more specifics on product scams.
Well, I would say ditto in general. The general advice is the same for everything, whether it's PPE or masks. I shared with you my disastrous mask experience. Deal with reputable retailers. They have a reputation. They have to screen these products. If it's online late at night, if it's on TV late at night, and you've never heard of the vendor, those are red flags to avoid. And the good news is that this virus now has been around for so long that mainstream retailers are carrying a lot of the stuff that we were going on to pop-up ads for before. The one thing I just wanted to add, Jevin and I have not talked about this, but we are of exactly like mind when it comes to the misinformation around vaccines going forward next year. We had a staff retreat recently where we talked about that. This is an example of something where I think collaborating with the University Center for Informed Public and AARP's 900,000 members could reap benefits. It's going to be a huge part of the recovery And I read all the same data that you just heard Dr. West talk about with people's worry about the vaccine. So that's a project we may very well work on together, hopefully, going forward.
Let's do it, Doug. We can confirm right now on recorded audio. Let's do it, because this is something that is really becoming one of our focus areas, and it's something that really is one of the keys, like you said, to getting out of this. And it's one thing for someone to be hesitant because they have health issues or because there's data coming in from one study that shows something, but it's another to not take a vaccination because 10 of the 10 articles you read were from a site that's not reputable, that none of the things being stated are correct. So basically what I'm saying is, we need to clean up this, the information pipeline to the public around this issue, because it's critically important and people should be concerned about their health and question things, but we want to make sure that they're at least getting information that's been vetted by research officials and public health officials.
Agree 100%. Yep.
All right. Well, that's all we have time for today. Thank you so much to both of our presenters today, to Dr. Jevin Weston and to Doug Shadell. And, fascinating subject. I feel like I have probably more questions now than before we got started. And if you're watching us online, you'll see on the slide, if you have any questions related to aging or disability, we do want to remind you that you can turn to Community Living Connections Network. It's supported by the City of Seattle and King County. You can call them at 1-844-348-5464 or visit them on the web at communitylivingconnections.org. Again, before we go, a big thanks to our presenters for being here today, for the help of Bruce Carlson from ARP Washington for his behind-the-scenes work, and of course to my Human Services Department colleague Andrea for moderating. But most of all, many thanks to all of you for tuning in to this live show this whole year and for checking it out on YouTube. If you haven't already, go ahead and click the subscribe button and the notification bell, and you'll join our virtual age-friendly community. It's free, and it helps us continue providing these events. Thank you all again very much. Please be safe, be well, be informed, continue staying socially and civically engaged in your community. We do look forward to seeing you and your friends at next week's season finale of Close to Home, Stories of Health, Tech, and Resilience. Please take care.